to have I use
effect.
yeah.
Yeah. Awesome. So thank you very much for joining, everyone, and I hope you enjoy this session. And the reason why we hold this session, just to give you a background, is just to give you a little bit who are these people on the platform. So these are civil servants, some are civil servants, young people in school, as well as like career diplomats as well, and as well as business people. So it's a multiplicity of audience, and we have like a cohort of 20 plus people, or this first cohort, and really they are really interested in diplomacy and the future of diplomacy, and they are all Africans. Some live on the continent and some live in diaspora as well. And
Okay.
African Rebirth has a mandate, sort of a mandate. If I use the word mandate, you understand better. A
Yeah.
mandate to train young future leaders uh, who are who are future diplomats, who are going to learn a lot from you, and as well as putting Africa to the next chapter of life or world, seizing the opportunities that diplomacy bring and the whole geopolitical world. So very well, much welcome. So Muhammad, I've shared your bio. Everyone knows who you are, and they can't wait to dive into this discussion. And like I said, negotiation and mediation is very important. A famous writer called Chester Karras said that you don't get what you deserve, you get what you negotiate. So
Perfect. Yeah.
let's see what it means today. So I don't want to take much of your time. I just want to give a floor to Mr. Muhammad from Pakistan. He will speak more about his experience, and he's a career diplomat with over a decade of experience. So very much welcome, brother. Thank you so much for joining, and here's the floor.
Thank you so much. Can you still hear me?
Yes, we can.
I'm trying to share my screen.
Oh, okay.
But
Let's see.
so let me. Uh, I think I have to re-quit and quit and rejoin.
Okay, it's okay. It's all right. Share.
Am I back?
Yes, you're back.
Um, so yeah, let me see how I'm still new to this. So and every
Alternative, you can share with me and I can help you share.
Okay, I'll
Yeah,
try to do it myself first. If it doesn't work, I'll definitely share it
perfect.
with you
Sounds
because
good.
I need to learn that as well, I think.
No, okay. Hmm.
Uh, entire screen share.
Perfect.
Uh,
You got
and
it.
now you can see my presentation, right?
Yes, yes.
So
Can.
perfect. Thank you so much. So I like to keep this a bit informal. I went through the questions that you shared. And I thought what I'll do is that since I have around 12 years of experience in both multilateral and bilateral diplomacy, so what I'll do is that I'll share my own thoughts and ideas as to how negotiations and mediations are important and where we stand as a profession at this particular time in 21st century. So it's a mixed bag. I do understand that the first question that you shared with me was sharing my own personal experiences. I have a lot of stories to tell, but I think I'll keep them for the later part, for the Q&A session, because I think the submissions that I have for your cohort are interesting, at least from my point of view. So that's how it is. Enoch, can you see that?
Yes. Yeah.
Okay. So this will be the sequence of my presentation. I'll briefly talk about why diplomacy matters, especially in today's time. And then, what, according to me, are the five principles of successful negotiations? I tried to, again, keep it very personal. You will find a lot of theoretical work in books, but I did want, since we are all practitioners, I wanted to give you my own perspective. And then I'll talk briefly about negotiations and how they are responding to traditional power politics. And then, most importantly, especially, I think that should be interest to you guys, what skill set I believe is needed for diplomacy, and how can diplomats deal with the power imbalance that we see. And I think it segues to the challenges in the 21st century. And then I'll close with some advice to young diplomats. So why diplomacy matters? It's uh, as old as humanity. It's one of the oldest professions in the world. And in every world order, in every time, in every space, diplomacy is something that is really important. I think it's the bedrock of civilizations. And it's something that is innate to human beings. We always have two options available to us. One is to have to resolve things by force, and then the other route is to do something peacefully. And whenever humanity, nations, people, groups, societies want to take a pacific route, they will use one or other form of diplomacy. So I believe diplomacy is something that is quintessential human. Uh, if you are trying to define human beings as individuals, but also as collective, diplomacy will feature very high in the list of values that make us who we are. And I think that is something that has really been a bedrock in our human progress as well. If we didn't have a diplomatic gene in us, I think we would have not been able to survive for this long, and perhaps, like other species, we would have killed each other in millennia ago. So diplomacy, I think it's a core human trait, and that's why it's important. I've charted down a few things that I believe makes diplomacy needed for today's world, and these are some of the reasons that I can think of. The number one is that protracted conflicts have eroded the post-war peace structure. So the world as we know it was largely created after the end of World War II, when the victors, US, UK, France, and the former Soviet Union, they came up with a rules-based international order, and that defined the kind of trajectory of history after 1945. It led to a lot of post-colonial freedom struggles. My country was also, Pakistan also came into being in 1947, and much of African map also changed. But now that system is increasingly coming under strain. There are a lot of conflicts that are there, and the international order at present seems either unable, or, if I may say, at times unwilling to address them. We have seen what's happening in Gaza, for example, in Sudan, in Yemen. We also saw what happened in Iraq and Afghanistan, in Haiti, and I'll not talk about the conflicts in Africa because you know way more than I do. But the problem is that every conflict, when it starts, there seems to be no end to it, and that's why there are a lot of questions on diplomacy as well. But my submission is that perhaps we're not doing using diplomacy enough. We're following some other routes that have made those conflicts protracted. And I think this is happening because we're living through a generational disruption of global order. I think for some time now, we have actors at global stage who perhaps don't believe in the structure that was created in 1945, and they want to go take us back to a different era. And I think that generational disruption is also something that makes diplomacy critical. And this is happening because power is not only fragmenting, but it's also diffusing. So when the Soviet Union collapsed in the late 1980s, and the Cold War ended, we went into a unipolar world, but very quickly it became multipolar. So, in terms of hard power, there's still no denying that the United States of America is the strongest country that has ever lived, I think, throughout human history. But if you look at economic power, if you look at soft power, there are a lot of other countries who are actually on the rise. So we have China, which is a rising power, but then we have a lot of middle powers from African continent, from Asia, from Latin America, and they are an important pillars of global system. And there is this push and pull that we are witnessing in today's world. If you follow what happened a few weeks ago in Davos, so the Canadian Prime Minister's speech in itself reflected that inherent tension in today's world. So while the world is still pretty much aware of the hard power that is possessed by one country, they're also lining up with one another to see how that can be balanced. And I think balancing power has been a critical question in every era, and I think we will see that push and pull unfolding in front of our eyes in future as well. Another element that is important is populism. There is a rising populism, I think, everywhere because of social media and mass mobilization. So that has renationalized foreign policy. So increasingly, the countries are looking inwards, and they're not really interested in helping each other out. At the same time, we have new actors who are shaping the outcome and without carrying any formal responsibility. If you look at the attendees of the World Economic Forum, while there are world leaders, there are also prominent businessmen, tech entrepreneurs, activists, and they carry a lot of weight. And they have kind of captured the diplomatic space, making our job as diplomats a lot difficult. But they are also like influencers who are not only shaping domestic discourse, but also shaping international politics. The problem is that all of these forces are not making us a collective, but they're also feeding into questioning the globalization and promoting populism. Can are you guys? Can you share? Is it fine?
Yeah, it's fine. It's fine. Yeah.
Okay. And at the same time, we have global challenges that are structurally transnational. So, like climate change, environmental degradation, migration. So, as long as we have these common global challenges, again, we will need diplomacy to resolve them because no country alone can fight it. Any one of those challenges. So that again makes us gives us an imperative to work together. And last but not the least, I think one of the bigger challenges that is emerging is technology, especially artificial intelligence and digital technologies. And they are increasingly becoming a threat. I can call them a modern sword of Damocles because there are real imminent threats that perhaps AI can even lead to mass extinction of human beings. So I think if you look at all of these problems, they cannot be resolved without diplomacy. No country alone can resolve them regardless of their power. No region alone can do it. If Africa wanted to do something about it, of course they would have a lot of agency, but they'll have to rely on the cooperation with Europe, with Asia, with Latin America. So all of these are pointing towards diplomacy in the 21st century as being the only saving grace or our humanity's best chance to resolve these. There is no other way that we can resolve these issues. But how do we do that? It's a commonsensical preposition that diplomacy is important. But what would make a successful diplomacy or successful negotiations? As a mid-career diplomat myself, I have come up with 5 principles. I've not taken them from any book. They are all my own experiences. So uh, you can feel free to question them, but I'll try to elaborate them one by one. So the first principle or the lesson that I've drawn in my career is that diplomacy is not an event, but a process. Many a times there is this tendency with the leaders, with media, with populations, that they think that if something has happened, or that is a success or that is a failure, and then they don't follow through. A good diplomacy or a good negotiations is always focused on a process, because you cannot resolve these problems by a stroke of one pen, or like by luck. For example, I'll give you a few examples. One is this picture. You remember during first Trump's presidency, Trump made a lot of effort to open up a channel with North Korea. He also even went. He was the first American president to cross the DMZ and went into North Korea. And then nothing really happened. There were a couple of meetings, few photo ops, but if you ask us today, I think we are at the same place where we were before these meetings happened, because all of us took them as groundbreaking events, but we were unable to focus on the process. Similarly, if you follow what's happening in Gaza, there was a lot of discussion on working towards ceasefire. Everyone wanted to have a ceasefire. So a ceasefire happened, then the ceasefire was broken. Again, when the last ceasefire was announced, it was as if an event has happened. But as long as we don't have an underlying process that is geared towards resolving the fundamental issues, it will not take us anywhere. In the last couple of decades, because of social media and because of a 24-hour news cycle, diplomacy is often projected as an event, but it is nothing but. So, if as diplomats, we should always be focused on process. Uh, we would have good days, we would have bad days, but it's our job to remain in the trenches, working towards the larger objective. That's why you will never see diplomats coming in front of the cameras or uh, assuming limelight, because that is not our job. That is not a function of diplomacy. Diplomacy has to remain behind closed doors, so that the process could continue, so that the trust remains alive. So that's number one. Number two principle, according to me, is that any country can choose its friends as well as its enemies, but you cannot choose your reality. Now, if you look at the picture, Enoch, this is a question that I need to share, and I think there are a lot of clues here as well. Can anybody guess what this is? What is this picture depicting?
Yeah, I think it's the like
I think
Pakistan.
it's like a map, yeah, map of Pakistan.
Mm.
Okay. Now, so when I was growing up, we used to hear that if you go to the space, the only thing that you could see is the Great Wall of China. I'm not sure whether you guys ever heard this or not, but this was a huge thing in Pakistan.
You're right.
Actually, that is not true. The only thing that you can see from space is the border between India and Pakistan. If you see this light,
Oh.
so this is a border that has been lit up, because it's a highly militarized border. So there's a fence on the border, and we have put a lot of lights and lamps, and because it's a continuous thing, you can actually see it from the space. So it's one of the very few man-made things, other than the cities, of course, because cities are these bright visual clusters of like people living, but this continuous line is nowhere else to be found on any given night, but you can clearly see it from space, because that is a reality.
Mhm.
So what I mean by that is that the diplomacy will always be based out of your reality. And that reality could be where you are located, how rich you are. It could also mean if you have a lot of minerals, like we have seen in a lot in case of a lot of African countries. It could be a curse as well. And a diplomacy has to play around the reality, because of course if you work really hard, if you grow economically, that reality can change. But in order for it to change, a lot of tools are available with the countries, but one of the most important one is diplomacy. If like you can be friends with one country, you can be enemies with another country, but as long as you are focused on understanding what is your reality and then doing something about it, I think that has to be the essence of diplomacy and mediation. A lot of the times countries take up positions that are not reflected in their realities, and I think that is the problem that we are seeing today. uh, since the war in Syria, since war in Yemen, we have seen that countries have positions that are based on their real politics, that are not based on principle. So if the principle is being against foreign occupation, there will be countries who will be saying, oh, the foreign occupation in Ukraine is wrong. But if there are other cases of foreign occupation, they'll just turn blind eye. And that will erode not only their own diplomatic credentials, but if there's a cumulative effect, it'll erode the global order. So I think a fundamental principle has to be that we need to keep this in mind. Then again, a third principle is that foreign policy, which drives diplomacy, is both external as well as internal. If the politics within countries is changing, the policies abroad will also change, and no one will be able to do anything about it. For example, when Brexit happened in a country where I'm sitting right now, it was a politically domestic decision that had huge ramifications for England's United Kingdom's foreign policy. Similarly, the way Republican administrations in the last 10 years have engaged with UN and climate change agreements is indicative of how domestic policy has an outsized influence on foreign policy. And one of my favorite examples is that when Woodrow Wilson came up with the idea of League of Nations, he was hailed as an architect of a new world, but his own Senate did not allow him to join because they did not want engagement. So, us diplomats, we are often consumed with politics abroad, but we at times we don't keep that close an eye on politics inside our own countries, because we're living abroad, we have different goals to achieve. I've always said that a good diplomat has to have a constituency back home as well, because you're not only projecting your domestic policies abroad, but if you believe in like international cooperation, you have this responsibility to go back to your legislatures or your leaders and impress upon them the utility and the need of cooperation. Uh, I'm sure if more diplomats were doing that kind of dual diplomacy, we would not have seen the kind of uh, processes that we have seen in the last few years. And the fourth one is an advice that one of my foreign secretaries gave me when I was a diplomat at New York. And it was that a country is as strong as its diplomat in a negotiation. When you are sitting in a multilateral or a bilateral discussion and you are sitting in that room, if a diplomat is strong, if he knows his stuff, if he is well prepared, he can do wonders. And I've seen that happening myself as well. Smaller countries like Cuba standing up to like strong countries because they knew the process, they knew the arguments, they were well prepared, they had made alliances, and they were able to punch above their weight. So it's not that diplomacy, while it's happening behind closed doors, it's consequential. So it's, while a country can draw strength from its military hardware, it can also draw strength from its diplomats. A very strong and powerful country can lose negotiations, legal battles, because when they come across diplomats who are really worth something, uh, they are able to deliver. And the fifth principle that I believe is that consensus does not inhibit progress. There is a criticism that is often levied upon diplomacy, is that diplomacy is slow. When you are working towards consensus, you give up a lot of things. It's the least common denominator. It's not radical. But what I would submit in response is that it has to be an incremental process. If you look at the climate change discussions, for example, so the way we started in the early 90s and where we were when the Paris Agreement was signed, and with every COP that happens, of course, everyone would want that the progress is swift. But if you have to take 190 plus countries along, consensus is a very delicate and a tricky thing. But if you are able to build it little by little, it is still progress. The only time that I believe that we undermine our processes is when we disregard consensus and we try something radical, because that could work for a year or two, but then we'll have to go back to consensus to build the things from the beginning. And that's linked to the first point that I made, is that diplomacy is never an event. It's a process, and consensus is something that fuels that process. So even if you are making a smaller gains that are not catchy, that you cannot put it in your press release, the people won't understand it, that's not the job of the diplomats. A diplomat job is to work towards the consensus and build the edifice like that. Now this leads me to the second broader question that Enoch had shared with me, is that how has negotiations become more important than traditional power politics in diplomacy? And for this, again, I have few thoughts, because I thought very hard about these questions, because they were tricky, and I think they are existential for any diplomat who is working in the field. And I think they're also linked with the qualities or skills that make a diplomat effective mediator. So I'll first deal with the how negotiations are important, and then I'll come back to the qualities. Now we have seen power imbalance in today's world. I think it's apparent, and that's what I mentioned in my opening monologue as well. And the hard truth is that diplomacy is rarely conducted among equals. Of course, there'll always be countries which are strong, and there'll always be countries that are weak. And I think diplomacy happens because both the weak and the strong countries decide not to use power, but to use their gray matter, their common sense, their rationality, their logic to resolve. So if countries are not equal, it's not a problem. It is a fact of life. I think it's a fallacy to believe that everyone is equal, but at the same time, it's also a fallacy not to be aware of what your strengths are. Like I said previously, a diplomat has to first and foremost understand his own reality. And if you understand your reality, you will not only be aware of your weaknesses, but you'll also be aware of your strengths. And you can always leverage those strengths to make a very strong diplomatic case. Because diplomacy, again, that's the second point. The task of diplomacy is not to eliminate imbalance, but to manage it intelligently. I can give examples of my own country. So we have very good relations with China, but at the same time, we have working very strong working relationship with the United States of America as well. We have just joined the Board of Peace, and that balance is important, and that's the core of diplomacy. And I think increasingly you will see a lot of countries, even when they're smaller, they're trying to balance that power asymmetry. And balance of power in any case is one of the core geopolitical realistic questions that the countries have been dealing with, not only within their region but at the globally. And another important issue that needs to be uh, that needs to be at the center is that power is never one dimensional. Uh, we have at times put a lot of agency with hard power, but we um disregard soft power. If you look at the example of South Africa, when Nelson Mandela, the great Nelson Mandela, was in the jail, he didn't have any power. He didn't have any army. He didn't have any weapons, but he had the power of his ideals, and those ideals resonated across the world and made him very powerful. Even today, people outside Africa remember Mandela, and not those who uh, had him captive. The same is the example of, again, a great leader, Mahatma Gandhi, who came up with this idea of non-violent protest. Again, he was against one of the biggest colonial power, the richest colonial power that the world had ever seen, but he ended up uniting a nation. And I think diplomats can use that as well. There is a lot of norm entrepreneurs on the global stage who can lead by example. For example, I can quote you an example of a Pakistani economist who came up with the idea of Human Development Index, and that changed the way global development came up. So a lot of times you will see diplomats from relatively weaker countries taking up intellectual leadership at global events. For example, Kofi Annan is another example. He was a giant of a man because he could lead through his intellect. So I think all those aspects define power, and I think diplomats need to be aware of that. Then they also need to be aware of the time and the space. If progress is not possible in 6 weeks time, maybe you should prolong it. If it's difficult for you to have discussions in one place, maybe you can go to another place. We have seen how bringing in more actors, more friends, building coalitions are able to sustain your efforts. And that's what we have been seeing in the case of Ukraine, for example. They're fighting a valiant battle against Russian, but then they have a very strong coalition in the Europeans. And even when they face some difficulties with the American partnership, they're able to rely on the leverages on their own soft power and on the coalitions, and they're able to sustain that war effort that they have been putting up. And at the same time, I think it has become increasingly important in the last few years is the war of narrative. Even a smaller country can pull a big punch if it can control narrative, not only for its own people but also globally, because with social media, with trends, with international media, I think if you can control the narrative, you control the story. Another important thing is that diplomats must also separate dignity from outcome, because a good negotiation is the one in which no one is happy but everyone can live with the outcome. It will be a very bad negotiation if is only one side is happy. And we saw what happened at the end of World War One, because it was victor justice. Within a few years, Germany rearmed and we went into World War II. because there was lack of dignity. And at the same time, if you strongly feel that if you are giving up something, if that would be an undignified thing, that negotiation would never go anywhere. So that's why it's important that we should have plan B, plan C, plan D, and then you can have like these theoretical things like BATNA, what is the best alternative, or where is that possible zone of agreement. So we need to keep that in mind. You can't go into a negotiation and focus only on your plan A, because it will never work. And now I'll talk briefly about what qualities or skills make a diplomat an effective mediator, and then I'll go towards my concluding remarks. And I think they are self-explanatory. A diplomat has to be trustworthy. It's often said that diplomat is someone who is sent by a country to lie on behalf of the sending state. I think that's absolutely wrong. We are not spies. We are not undercover agents. If a diplomat is not telling the truth, his interlocutors will stop engaging with him. They'll never trust him. If you're not seen as someone honest enough, why would the receiving country be dealing with you? So the trust is important, and I think it has to work both ways. You have to tell your government, your bosses, that I can only deliver if I am perceived as trustworthy, because otherwise the negotiations will fail. And if there are question answer during the end, I can tell you my own stories as well. But I think that is really important. Oftentimes it is assumed that diplomacy is like you are hoodwinking someone, or you are selling something that is at the cost of other person's gain. That never happens. It can happen once or twice, but once you have found out, then the game is over. So you will have small wins, but that chapter will be over really quickly. At the same time, you need to have flexibility. Like I said, plan A's never work. But if you are so strong and passionate about some point, then it will lead to a protracted conflict. Either if it's a bilateral thing, the countries will keep on fighting that battle, whether on media, whether on real front lines. If they're not able to show flexibility, we will remain in that. And then availability again is another important issue, not only for diplomats but also for foreign policy. Most of the times we have seen that a lot of issues are sent to cold storage and no one is really talking about it, but they are still there. Not turning a blind eye from an issue doesn't wish the issue away. So I think diplomats, their agenda, they have to be available. If we are not talking amongst our peers, then the soldiers are doing battles on the ground. And it goes to the fundamental dichotomy. Either the soldiers will be fighting, or the politicians will be making statements, or the diplomats, if they are available, they will be doing. So it's I think the best option is that when diplomats are doing stuff. And this is linked to communication. A good diplomat is someone who can not only communicate properly, but he can understand what's being said by the other side and communicate it back. Because if there is a mismatch there, then God save us, because then of course it will not work. And linked with communication is the factor of empathy. If you do not appreciate the pressures or the imperatives that the opposition has, then you will never be able to negotiate with them in good faith, because they also have their own governments, their own people, their own realities to address. And I think a good diplomat is someone who understands that this is something that my partner will be able to give up, and this is something that he will never be able to give up, because it will amount to his own fall. So keep on asking for that would be counterproductive. Linked with that is the understanding of agency. In my experience, I've seen that those diplomats who are seen as go-getters, or for example, if you're talking to someone and you know that he can make calls to his leadership and make them understand and get decisions from them, they are very effective. On the other hand, if there's a diplomat, if there's an envoy, you know that even if he's saying something in the negotiations, he doesn't have enough political backing or support or agency that he'll make his government agree to what has been agreed in the room. Then again, that diplomat, because of his lack of agency, will not be any effective. And to cover all this up, is a diplomat is a part of something grander. He is not alone in it. So he should not be chasing peace prizes or personal accolades, because it's not the job of the diplomat. So instead of chasing personal wins, a diplomat has to focus on the process. And this again links to the first point, is that if a diplomat sees his work as a continuous process, then a process continues. There are no personal victories there. I've talked about this, and I'll just close this with an advice to young diplomats, and then we'll go to the question and answer session. My first and foremost advice is a diplomat has to make friends, because enemies make themselves. And at times, coming from a country, we were taught really early that we need to make friends across the aisle. And it's even true in case of countries where there is animosity. For example, if a country, in case of India and Pakistan, for example, if diplomats don't talk to one another, then who will talk to the other side? So if they don't have a working relationship, then the diplomacy as a whole will deteriorate, and that will be a problem. So you'll have to make friends with someone who you trust, someone who you don't trust, because at the end of the day, you will be working with them, and those personal relationships come in really handy when push comes to shove. The second advice that I always give to my students and my peers is that you should be proud of what you represent. You should not only know who you are, what's your history, what's your character, what's your identity, but you should always be proud of it, because when you are representing your people, your communities, your countries, it's a huge privilege. And if you don't feel proud about it, if you just take it as just another profession, then I think you're unable to do justice with the nature of representation, because you'll be very good with the talking points and you'll be very good with negotiating positions, but you will not be able to draw any pleasure out of it, and you will not know the reasons why you are doing it. I mean, why are you arguing for things that you are, if you don't know what you are representing? At the same time, in diplomacy, mistakes happen. It has increasingly become a very transparent profession. There are a lot of eyes on you, a lot of limelight. There are a lot of protocol related issues, a lot of visits to handle, and when you are dealing in that high pressure situations, you are bound to make mistakes. But then the show must continue. It's not the end of the day, because of the high profile nature of things, at times it seems that if something has happened, this will be the end of it, but the world doesn't really end until it ends. And if it only ends when diplomats will stop working. Focus on soft power. Diplomats are agents of soft power. So focus on your culture, your cuisine, your music, your traditions, your clothing. That really helps you stand out. And also it helps to make friends as well. Some of the friends that I made were people who I invited to lunches and dinners, introduce them Pakistani food, our tradition. If there's a good song that have come out, I'll share it with my friends, and that's a conversation starter. And then that gives you that advantage in a negotiation, because if you have other things to talk with your partners, uh, other than the paragraphs that you are negotiating, it keeps the line of communication human, and it really helps you. At the same time, always be constructive and approachable. This is more important in multilateral settings, where you might not have a strong opinion about every issue, but if you are a constructive minded diplomat, you can build bridges, you can bring different countries together. That would be helpful. Again, knowing history is important, because if I'm projecting diplomacy as a process, we need to see it as a part of history as well, because what we are doing is something that that is happening because a lot of things happened in the past. A diplomat from Africa, if he doesn't know the history of Africa, will not be that effective. Similarly, a Pakistani diplomat not knowing our history will not know why we have a particular position on issues like human rights, or on climate change, or on disarmament. So a diplomat is someone who is a history buff. And I think international relations, most of the times, they focused on the current. While current affairs are important, I think current affairs without the historical context are just nothing. So I think history has to be the foundational bedrock on which everything related to diplomacy is constructed. For example, if I'm going to a process in New York, for example, on development, so I would personally like to know where it started. So if it who started the discussion, what was happening at that time, how many conferences happened, what historical events have led that to this position. At times, because of the time constraints, we are only focusing on a particular conference and just the background papers, and we are discarding the historical uh, uh, knowledge that we have, and that dilutes the discussion, because then you are just uh, going through the motions. You're not really aware of what you're trying to do. And last but not the least is mastering the process. A diplomat who doesn't know the rules of procedure, how can you call for early decision, how can you prolong decisions, who will make decision, will it be a consensus based decision, will it be a majority based decision, how many votes do you need to win, will the voting be open, will the voting be secret, if it will be secret, how will it be done. Once you know the processes, you are able to maneuver your way around it. If you are not sure how it will be done, then you're always asking the other person, I want to do this, and then he might give you good advice, he might not give you good advice. So mastering the process is really important. So I'll close with this. I'll be more than happy to um, answer any questions that you may have. I do acknowledge that it was a bit abstract, uh, but I wanted to give you my personal uh, experiences and insights, and I didn't want to make it too much academic, because I think your cohort can get it from anywhere.
Absolutely.
So,
Wow. Thank you, Mo. Thank you very much, Muhammad. That's very, very exciting. And I think taking from your own experience, it actually is the best thing, because if you take it from outside books, academia, then you're not speaking from your personal experience. And I think that's very, very insightful. So we are going to the Q&A. Raise up your hand if you have a question. And just for the purpose of Muhammad, state your name and the country you come from, and then you can ask the question. And please, if you can put your video on, that would be exciting as well. Question? So, Mana? Yeah, Mana?
Yes, hello everyone. My name is Manal Hassan Al Mayhoub. I'm from Libya. I really appreciate everything I have learned today. It was really educative. I have a question for Mr. Muhammad. According to his biography, uh, in light of your experience with the FATF action plans, I'd like to relate this to the current Libyan context. Libya is in the process of updating its national strategy for combating money laundering and terrorist finance and preparing for new mutual evaluation process. From a governance perspective in such setting, where the state is trying to build legislation and institutional framework aligned with the FATF standard, um, while at the same time needing to allocate sustainable resources to reconstruction and economy deliberation beyond oil and sustainable growth, as highlight in recent economic assessment. So, how can a country like Libya strike a balance between the high costs of strict AML and CFT compliance and its urgent sustainable development and non-oil growth priorities? And do you think that international pressure on financial compliance can sometimes push fragile or post-conflict state, such as Libya, toward a level of financial regulation that may intentionally constrain economic activity or slow recovery if it's not designed in a gradual and context sensitivity way.
I think it's a great question, and I totally agree with you. In case of Pakistan, we went into FATF processes, two simultaneous FATF processes. So we went into grey list through nomination, and then we also went into grey list after our mutual evaluation process. I think in Pakistan's case, if we talk about our experience, I think there were two things that we learned from that process. And the first thing is that every country does its own risk assessment, and that risk assessment has to take into consideration their reality. That was again one of the points. In our case, we were a bit too ambitious with our risk assessment, and that came to haunt us later. Because if you are saying to the international community that these are the risks, then they would expect you to take certain actions to address those risks. So I think in fragile countries, it's really important to outline that while there are risks, how will you be able to address them? Because there's lack of capacity, there's a lack of training, there's lack of international support, and we need to consistently be putting those things at the agenda as well. The other thing that happened in our case was that it's one thing to have legal frameworks and procedures. It's another thing to implement them the way they are written, not only in your own legal documents, but also in like international documents that you have responsibility. So in case of Pakistan, for example, we have an anti-money laundering act. We had a countering of terrorist financing act. But when they went into when the FATF came and they saw how those laws were being implemented, we had problems. Instead of going through that route, and it took us some years, and because we were under FATF, so then FATF started helping us. But I think once you make the laws, it's really important that you start building the relevant capacities from the beginning, because in a lot of developing countries, there's this tendency that we get advisors from abroad, and they advise us with laws that are like top notch or like global standard, but then they are not catering to our own ground realities. And once we start implementing them, then we find, oh, this is not really possible because there are so many other stakeholders. And the same can be said with regards to IMF programs in a lot of countries. So a lot of advice that comes from IMF, on paper, it looks fantastic. But once you start implementing them, the government always realizes, oh, if we start taxing this economic sector, this will have these repercussions that people sitting in Washington, IMF headquarters, or in other places, they don't really understand, because they only see the data that the government share with them, and that data is how much GDP is there in the economy, what's the trade, what are exports. But the local context is something that the countries needs to put up. We learned it the hard way, and when we went into the gray list, we started telling people, oh, no, we can do this, but this cannot be done because these are all the reasons which were legitimate, uh, that will prevent us from doing it, but we will put them in our risk assessment document, and we'll have a roadmap with our own context and realities. And with your help and partnership, this is where we are ending. Because at the end of the day, in terms of FATF, all they wanted was a compliance that it decreases their risk it, in the longer run. So I think with focusing on your own capacity and realizing your own particular context, that's the way it should be. And I think from the very beginning, the diplomats or whoever are negotiating need to put those ground realities right in the center. Otherwise, it will just be a dictation from the foreign agencies.
Thank you. Satisfied, Mana? Or any more clarification? Okay.
Yes, it was a really good answer. Thank you, Mr. Muhammad.
Thank you. Thank you.
Awesome.
And it was a very good question, I must say.
Mhm.
Very technical.
So I think, Dennis, you have a question as well.
Yeah, hello, Mohammed. Thanks for this presentation. Well, actually, what I wanted to ask is, how sort of normative ideals of countries might change upon contact with, say, greater world powers, right? Say, Pakistan, for instance, probably had some normative ideals, some guiding principles that sort of shape their diplomacy, right? So in their negotiations with, say, the US, China, Russia, how do you think, in practical terms, these sort of normative guiding principles might change?
I think again, it's a very good question, and I think it varies from situation to situation. But if there is a strong normative principle that is grounded in your worldview, or it's grounded in your ideology, ideally you should not be changing it. Because if you change your position because of a certain political consideration, then it will come back to haunt you years later. But at the same time, because diplomacy is often reactionary, so you are reacting to the things that are beyond your control. So at times it makes sense for you to be a bit more pragmatic. And I'll give you one example. So Pakistan has joined a board of peace that's been promoted as a new platform by US president. But when we joined it, it was still not clear as to what would be the terms of reference. The first meeting is supposed to happen soon in Washington. And there was a lot of discussion back home as to whether we should join it, we should not join it. We are the member of the Security Council at the moment. Will it dilute the international rules-based order as we have seen it? But at the same time, because the way international diplomacy is happening these days, it's kind of pragmatic to be on the table and see where the process is heading. And if that process goes into certain things that are your red lines, you can always take a step back. So that's pragmatism. But on the other hand, when there are cases of foreign occupation or intervention into other countries affairs, or if there are wars, if your position starts shifting, like we have seen in the case of Ukraine and Gaza, some countries are very pro-Ukraine, but when it comes to Gaza, they say, oh, no, we don't see a problem here, and vice versa. There are a lot of Muslim countries who are always talking about Palestine, but their position on Ukraine is a bit shady, because they think that if we take a very strong position, that might go against our relationship with a bigger player in that conflict, that's Russia. So those are the compromises that, if they are against the norms that, or the values that you feel important, will be problematic, because then you will have a problem 5-10 years down the road, and when the other countries will take positions based on their own calculations of politics, then you will be left with no friends. I think it's important for a diplomat as well as his country to be predictable in their responses. So if I can predict that a certain country will have this position on this issue, I think 60% or 70% of work has been, foundation is laid down better. But if I'm always guessing in every particular situation that what our country is going to respond, then it's a very difficult world. So while pragmatism is important, it has to be grounded on some norms.
Excellent.
Thank you. Yeah, I think that's a very great answer. Thank you.
Oh, great. Other questions? Okay. Maybe people understood much. Was so clear.
or didn't understand anything.
No, I hope
Yeah.
they understood. Yeah, absolutely, they understood. Yeah, but my question, Mohammed, maybe to ask on behalf of us, just to make, so you coined some of I was writing some of so populism. Do you want to talk about a little bit of what do you mean by populism? It might be a strange new word to people. And as well as talk about when you say empathy in negotiation, does someone might interpret it like, okay, you need to be a soft person, you just need to be a nicer person. What exactly do you mean in the context of empathy? Because empathy can be understood in different ways, putting yourself in someone's shoes, etc. So it kind of sort of bring out a softer, a softer part of diplomacy, which in some cases there are really serious problems in diplomacy where you have to be very assertive, and like Russian diplomats, they're actually very aggressive and they can give you hard time as well. So give also a context there for our audience to understand a little bit about that. Then we'll
Okay,
go
so
to Patrick.
I'll start with empathy. I think it's a good point, because a diplomat has to be stern as well. You can't give up on your positions, because otherwise you'll be a sellout. What I mean by empathy is that at the same time, while you are very strong in and can have conviction in your values, you also need to understand the other side as well, because other side will also have their red lines. Other side will also have their own leadership to be answerable to. And if you're not aware of those, then you will not be able to find a common ground. I'll give you an example. So when I was in New York in 2019, I was pen holder of a General Assembly resolution that talked about interreligious and intercultural cooperation. And somehow I thought it will be a good idea to include a reference to a bilateral agreement that happened between India and Pakistan. It was called Kartarpur Sahib Corridor. So what happened was that there was this Sikh shrine in Pakistani side of the border, and we started giving visa-free access to Sikhs to come and visit it, because there were no bilateral talks going on.
Yeah.
So that agreement happened in March. And then we had a huge problem with India in August when they changed the status of Jammu and Kashmir, and all negotiations broke down with India. And there I was in October doing a General Assembly resolution when I said I need to have that reference because my government will like it because it was their initiative. But I could not do that alone. I needed to have Indian agreement as well because it was a bilateral agreement, and no one was talking with India at that time. So I talked to my ambassador, and he said, okay, if you feel strongly about it, we can discuss it in a closed group session. So I talked to a few friends who talked to the Indian colleague, and then they said, okay, we'll agree, but we'll only agree if we say appreciate the decision of the government of Pakistan and the government of India too, because it was. And my ambassador was like, no, we'll not appreciate their government. It was our initiative. And it was very difficult for me because A, it was our idea. B, it was a bilateral thing. They would have never agreed to just a language that says appreciate government of India and not mention government. So that's my idea of empathy as well, because I needed to explain their position to my superiors as well, because I think that was my job as a diplomat as well. Otherwise, I would have just said take it or leave it, fine. And that could have worked, that could not have worked. I could not. But at the end of the day, we were able to get a consensus document. And I'm very proud of the fact that it's the only time that Pakistan and India tabled something that is joint, that's a joint proposal. But that only happened because you are aware of the limitations of the other countries. So that kind of empathy is important. In the Russia-Ukraine conflict, for example, when you start talking about concessions by Ukrainians on certain territories, you can ask about, oh, give up Kyiv as well. But of course, no, they'll not do it. You have to show that level of understanding. So that's what I meant by empathy. But very quickly, by populism, I meant the kind of politics that is on the rise, the kind of political leaders that are on the rise, the way they are projecting their politics. All they want, everything that they do is very public. So they're appeasing to their support base. They have their own value set. So we've seen that in case of President Trump, in Germany, in India, in Poland, in my own country. So a lot of leaders are now, they have their own constituencies, and the policy that they're making is designed to placate or like appease them. And it's a shift from the policies that are designed by institutions or establishment, so to say, which were predictable. For example, you could always predict, this is going to happen. But in populism, because it's a rage bait, it's based on ratings. If a leader thinks that a stance against a certain country is popular, so let's do it.
Let's do it.
Because it's getting me likes, or it's getting me good views. So that kind of populism, if it's on the rise, and it's on the rise, then it makes the job of diplomats really difficult, because it's difficult to predict what's going to happen and then prevent that thing from happening. For example, Greenland. So it might be very popular with President Trump's supporters to invade and capture Greenland. But what will be the consequences? Because the voter on the ground doesn't really understand foreign policy. The people who voted for Brexit, they didn't understand what
the consequences,
the technicalities of being at the EU, because and the advantages that the UK. Everyone had a personal. Some wanted control on immigration. Some said that NHS was the fund for NHS were going to the European Union, and they had their own little angle from looking at a much larger problem. And when they decided, now there is a lot of literature here that says that Brexit perhaps was a mistake. I can't say it because it's not my place to judge it, but it's a difficult, complicated situation. But it was decided by a popular vote. It wasn't decided through other means, and it was that entire discussion was framed by populist leaders, because they sensationalized the problems, and that could be a problem.
Excellent. So today's politics, rules-based order is no longer in working. So people are resorting to what sentiment, appealing to sentiments, what people like.
Yeah.
Thank you very much. Patrick, you had a question. Then we can try to wrap up quickly. Patrick, then Alem, really quick.
Yeah, thank you so much for the floor given. I'm Patrick Ndururute. I am from Burundi, and first of all, I would like to thank Mr. Muhammad for the interesting presentation he has done. It is very interesting, especially when he is sharing his own experiences in diplomacy. I was really interested when he was talking about the qualities of a good diplomat, and when he was also giving some advices to us who are aspiring diplomats, future diplomats. So my question is, from your own experiences as you have been sharing it through this session, what may you say that distinguish a successful diplomat from a failed one? Thank you.
I think the most important quality is to make friends. If you are likable, if you can talk to people, if you make conversation, and if you can talk about things other than work, because it's easy to talk about work because everyone in the same boat, but then you're only talking business. I think the effective diplomats, especially when I was in New York, were those who became your friends, because then you can have those transactions with them.
Yes.
And also another quality that I wanted to put in the presentation, but then I thought maybe I was exceeding time, is that at times diplomats have to act like investigative journalists, because no one has complete picture of what's going on. Everyone has bits and pieces of what's going on. It could be their opinion, it could be their analysis, it could be some snippet of information that they have. So in order to have the complete picture, you need to talk to people and pick up their brains. And Russians would have a different understanding, Turks would have different understanding, Americans would have different understanding, African countries will have different countries, and within Africa, Egypt and South Africa or Nigeria will have a totally different perspective of looking at things. So if you have that social capital where you can like if I need to understand something about Burundi, and if I can text Enoch and say, brother, what are your opinions about that? If I had a prior personal connection with him, and if Enoch is my friend, then it will be easier for me to have that exchange of ideas. If I don't know Enoch, and if it's just a contact in my embassy, and I have, because when you go to embassy, you always get list of contacts. So because every embassy circulate their list of contacts. So like embassy of Burundi would circulate, this is the number of my ambassador, this is the number of my deputy, this is the number of third secretary, first secretary. So it happens, you just pick up the phone and you say, oh, hello, Mr. Enoch, this is Mr. Muhammad from Pakistan. My president is visiting, so I'm making a brief. So can you give me data about your trade? And 7 times out of 10, I'll get that data, but it will not be a meaningful thing. But if so first thing that I do, and I was advised, is that to identify important countries, important players, and you meet them. So in the first 2-3 meetings, you don't talk about any business thing. You try to make friendship. And once you have that, of course, it will not happen with 10 out of 10 people, but it could only happen with 3, 4, 5, but they are enough. So so before coming to Oxford, I was in Riyadh. So I was very good friends with the Chinese and the Russian and the Japanese. So half of the things of the Western countries were shared with me by the Japanese colleague. So he knew that the Americans are doing something like this. So even if I couldn't really check it with the Americans, I could check it with the Japanese, and then I would check it with someone else, and I could say, oh, this is what they're trying to do, and I would send the report back. So I think those communications, those personal communications, are really, really, really important. I was in New York, for example, and I was working in an NGO committee, and there was this NGO that was being blocked by a delegate of Israel, and it was a Jordanian NGO. And the Jordanian foreign minister wrote to our foreign minister that they would want Pakistan help. I knew someone who was very good friends with the Israeli delegate. And using that channel, we were able to come up with something that we wanted. But if I had said no, I don't know anyone, Israel is some country that we don't recognize. How can I put third country in charge? But because of those friendships, how that happened, we used to play tennis together. So that's how it works. So
Very good. Excellent answer. For sure. Personal friendship goes beyond reason, for sure. Thank you, Muhammad. Alan.
Okay.
Yeah. Then Alan Agiel.
Hello.
hello. Yes, hello.
Hello, Mr. Mohammed. Good morning, good evening, and good afternoon, all of you, my dear brothers, especially the distinguished diplomats here in Africa and the world. And first of all, I would like to say thank you very much indeed, my dear brothers, Mr. Enoch, the founder and the president, and especially the emerging leader and the diplomat of Africa, and the new scholars, the young scholars. And thank you very much for the opportunity. And also, Mr. Mohammed, thank you very much for your knowledge, experience, and the skills that you are providing for us. It is the demanding, and it's the right time and the right moments. And thank you very much indeed. This is Alam Shambal Ben Alfo, young scholars and a lecturer of public diplomacy and state communication at University of South Africa, and also lecturer of public relations and strategic communication at Jijga University, Ethiopia. And my question, I have two questions that I want to forward for this session. First of all, Mr. Mohammed, as you know that in the digital age, especially in the 21st century, since there is a power asymmetry or a power imbalance, okay? There is the global south and global north. I don't know which nation or which institution has the right to provide such category. I don't know. But if there is such category, global south and global north, or the developed nation and underdeveloping or middle developed or developing country, or if there is a core state or periphery. So in this regard, or in this scenario of the world, how can a mediation ensure sustainable peace or sustainable reconciliation, and also locally owned implementation in the context of Africa or the global south, since the suprastate, they are interfering? How can the global south countries create or build sustainable conflict resolution or reconciliation with an effective mediation?
I think it's a very good question. I think you had two questions, so I like to
second questions. As you know that in the global south, there are a lot of NGOs that are, playing their own role in the name of supporting, particularly in Africa and predominantly in my country, Ethiopia. I have seen a lot of NGOs, but they are trying a lot of things to do something, but they are living and they are established more than enough and reaffirm their lives, and their coexistence is become more established in the area of conflict. So are they a peace builder or are they conflict inciter?
Uh, it's a very good question. I
This
think
is
Well,
from your
we
experience.
yeah.
yeah. No,
Thank you very much.
okay. I think both questions are very valid. I think with regards to your first question, I think the global South also like needs to understand that while there is power asymmetry, there is a lot of opportunities for South-South cooperation, and I think there is a lot of momentum in that regard as well.
Yeah.
And within the so-called global South, there are a lot of countries that are really rising, and they're rising at pace that is really enviable. Even if you look at Africa, the pace at which the Eastern African countries are rising is if you see their annual GDP growth, it's remarkable. The problem is that for far too long we have relied on our partners in the global North to lead the way, and at times we have found them wanting. So not every country is fulfilling their ODA promises. Then we have countries who are joining global accords, and then they're leaving the global accords, and the rest of the world, especially the global South, is left at times looking for alternatives. But I think we need to go back to what happened, especially during the NAM era, the non-aligned movement, when we thought that and I think we are going into again those bipolar world, because increasingly countries will be asked to choose between one power or another. I think that's happening in terms of technology, as we have seen with 5Gs and other critical infrastructure. There is a lot of pressure by certain countries that you can't have Chinese technologies because it poses risk to them. You've seen what happens with the entire issue of ownership of TikTok and how it played up in. So I think those battles and conflicts will be fought in every country as the world progresses. But I think what Global South can do is, like I said in my presentation as well, is to understand their own realities. At times you need to be pragmatic, but at the same time you can make coalitions. So African Union is a very good example, and in more and more cases, the world realizes that if there is a common African position, the countries will not break it. And there are very few cases where the common African position were broken. But if Africa can stand together on few issues, for example, when I was in New York, we knew for a fact that if there is a consensus within Africa on candidatures to certain UN bodies, then that's it. You can't open that file again. There will be supranatural forces. There will be companies. There will be corporations who will have a force, because they are the realities of today's world. And I also pointed that out in my presentation. Those are the actors that have the influence and zero responsibility. So our data is being mined and it's being used to train the AI models, but we don't have any agency as to do something about the inherent biases. People who look like us may be framed as outsiders, immigrants, even terrorists. And if technology models are trained in those data sets, then what we can do? But what we can do is to make alliances, and it's imperative. It's a difficult road, of course, because there is power asymmetry, but it's a viable plan that can work. It might take a lot of time, but we have seen that in cases of organizations such as BRICS. So in BRICS, you have countries from now with the expansion of BRICS. So they are the countries who represent a lot of global resources, global populations. Africa does that. OIC does that. ASEAN does that. SCO does that. And if we play on that polarity, even in US, China, you see how the Europeans are now leveraging and hedging. Even you see how Canada is. If you listen to Prime Minister Carney's statement at Davos, even he was talking about hedging. So if global North is being forced to do that, it means that that's a viable option for us as well. With regards to your second question, very quickly, it varies from case to case. Of course, there are NGOs who are problematic. Without naming an NGO, we once banned an NGO in Pakistan, and the next day an ambassador came to see our minister that why we have banned this NGO, and we were like, this is an NGO, why a government is speaking to us? I mean, yeah. So of course, if so, there are cases like that, but then NGOs do work in some areas which are really helpful as well, because they are force multipliers in some sense. But regulation, government oversight is important, because in countries that are emerging from conflict, they'll always have security considerations. In places where there's conflicts based on resources, I will always question NGOs who are receiving funding from abroad as to what are their real incentives. So I think states will have to do it, but also I think local communities and populations also need to be aware, because we need to follow the money from where it's coming and from where it's going. So for every 10 NGOs that are doing wonderful work, you will find few that are just because it's a business as well at the end of the day. But it's how the game is played. I mean, so it's an ongoing thing, and it's not that we can't wish this thing away, because NGOs, and they're important. So we had a lecture yesterday. Enoch, I think, were busy somewhere, but if humanitarian funding is being reduced and countries are not funding UN World Food Program or UN refugees, so you will need NGOs who are in that space providing food and shelter to people, or education, or the platform like this one, the African Rebirth. It's a good platform. Because they're providing you goods that the government either cannot provide, or if it will provide, it will not have that scale or that access. So there is room for it, but of course, like anything, it can be abused, and we need to be vigilant, and the communities need to be more vigilant, because in third world countries, states have their own handicap as well.
Excellent. Thank you, Muhammad. Really quick, Aliel, then we wrap up.
Thank you very much.
Aliel, you have a question?
Yes, hello.
Yes. Yeah, so you ask really quick, and then we wrap up. Yeah.
Yeah. Thank you. Thank you very much, Coordinate. And I'd like just to thank Mr. Muhammad for the skillful skills that he has shared with us. And I just have one question. There is where you were just speaking about the principles, the 5 principles of successful negotiation. So within those, there is a fourth one, which was saying that a country is as strong as its diplomats. So I would then like to know, we always try to compare country to another one. For example, when we are in the UN Council or different assembly of the UN meetings, there is always, we tend to see, especially African and Asian countries, they tend to be the very small, or the somehow neglecting countries, like the countries which doesn't have a lot of power, if I may say so. So I would then ask, what can be done for a country, from these countries we're saying they are poor countries? How can a country can make the
Oh, you lost. Hello, Alia?
Dealing with 51 resolutions. So that's a mismatch that'll always be there, because we can't really compete with them. But I think what like when I said, a lot of countries, what they can do is that they can then prioritize capitals. So you, in case of Pakistan as well, so we have diplomatic relations with majority of UN member states. We don't have embassies everywhere in the world, and we send our young diplomats to places where they'll expose to those kinds of pressure. And then you can start with taking intellectual leadership. Of course, you will not be able to take leadership on like Russia, Ukraine. I mean, even if Pakistan wants to take leadership on Russia, Ukraine, no one will listen to us. I mean, they'll say, what are you trying to do here? But we can take leadership on climate change, on refugees, on food scarcity, on so for example, locust was a huge issue when I was there. So there were a lot of rains in northern Africa, and there was a lot of locusts that they went from northern Africa to Middle East and then Pakistan, and they destroyed a lot of crops. And there were African diplomats, because they knew that problem. They took a lot of lead in some of those, and we would go to them and we would ask for their input or their advice, because we thought they are the ones who know the stuff. When Ebola was happening, so Ebola was a localized endemic in Africa. Mm-hmm. And African diplomats who dealt with Ebola were critical when COVID happened, and they were the ones making policies in Geneva and WHO, because they knew that. So I think countries who want to develop their diplomatic services, they can focus on niche areas, develop intellectual capacities, and then use them as platform, because when diplomats get those kind of confidence, then of course in the longer run, then they can they can be effective. And like I said, you can have the best diplomat, but they'll work within their own reality.
Yeah.
So that's a constraint. So I'll not be solving world problems, even if I'm the best diplomat in the world. But I need to be competent enough that if I'm in a negotiations with India, with Iran, with Afghanistan, with China, that is my reality. Mm-hmm. I'm able to protect my national interest. Mm-hmm. I don't need to do anything else. If there's a diplomat from Burundi or Rwanda, so he has a distinct reality. If there's a diplomat from ECOWAS, he has a distinct reality.
Yeah.
If you are a climate country which are facing climate disasters, so you can develop your capacities in those areas. So Cuban diplomats were really good. And when you talked about sanctions, I think there's no one in the UN who can beat Cuban diplomats, because they've been living under sanctions for like 60 odd years now. So they will not have enough resources to talk about space or disarmament, but you will never win an argument on sanctions against a Cuban diplomat, because that's their reality. So I think that's the first stage. And then of course it's a culture within foreign ministries as well. So you will find foreign ministries who have very good diplomats who are for multilateral negotiations, and there are foreign ministries where bilateral is more important or regionalism is more important. So it's a choice that the countries can make.
Absolutely. Okay, so
thank you.
All right.
I would like just to ask if after this session you can share the notes so that we may go through them again. Thank you.
Yeah, sure. I'll share that with Enoch.
Sure. Yeah. All right. Thank you very much, Mr. Muhammad. Thank you very much for your. Please join me and thank him for his insightful session. I think it's not.
I think there's. There was. Okay. No, nothing.
Oh, okay. So join him and thank him for his time and very insightful session. So thank you very much, Muhammad. And I believe, just like a tip of an iceberg, there's a lot you can uncover. You can learn from various areas. And Muhammad, you've given us a roadmap, what to expect, because you also unleashed some myths about diplomacy. You are an ambassador sent to lie on behalf of your country. but we look at through experience. You have to be trustworthy. That's which creates credibility as well. So, as young people trying to go into the walls of diplomacy, or you've started being in diplomacy, these are the best insights you can articulate, like you say. And by the way, going away from the state to state or international, multilateral, bilateral, this is everyday skill you need in life. Everyday skills. You need to negotiate your way out. You need to negotiate your salaries. You need to go to negotiate with the various stakeholders. You need to negotiate if you have NGO. You need to negotiate with funders. You need to negotiate every time you're still negotiating. If you're in business, every day you're negotiating. So this is a reality of life, and I like the way you say that. You have to choose. You choose your enemies or your friends, but you don't choose your reality. And I think most of us, people in general, we don't choose our own reality. We don't understand our own reality, which is very problematic because you can't understand yourself. So thank you very much. And I believe this is just the beginning of excellent diplomacy. And I really appreciate your time. Yeah.
Thank
By the
you so
way,
much, Enoch. It was a pleasure.
Mohammed is my colleague. So we go to class together, the class of diplomacy. So
Half of the things I've learned, they're from Enoch. So
yeah,
yeah.
no, please, no, please. He's lying. He's just being nice. So thank you very much, Muhammad, and everyone. Have a very good time and appreciate it. Yeah,
Thank you. Take care. Take care. Enjoy your weekend.
thank you.
Thank you. Bye.